So we'll go ahead and get started. Hello, everyone, and thank you guys for joining us this afternoon or whatever time it is, wherever you are. So today, the LISC and Next Street team are presenting Building Equitable and Inclusive Small Business Ecosystems in Smaller Cities. So this webinar is just building on the Practitioner's Guide that we released last year. So we're going to be diving into what that looks like in your communities. And we do want to give a special thank you to all of our funders, as you can see here on the first slide. So we will have a poll question now. Our first question we'll be pushing out to each of you is, what type of organization do you represent? So please feel free to click that when it pops up on your screen. And in the meantime, while you're doing that, once you finish doing that, please in the chat, please feel free to introduce yourself and place where you are joining us from. All right, and now our next poll question we have for you guys is, how large is your organization in terms of staff? All right, thank you. So now we're going to kick it off to Armando. He's going to lead us in our icebreaker for today.
Thanks, Destiny. So before we actually even just jump into the icebreaker, just wanted to share out this word cloud. So for folks, as you had registered, we had asked you all, what were you looking to learn from this workshop? But then also, what are some of the challenges that you experience when you're going into, small business ecosystem focused work and really trying to be equitable in terms of how you're approaching that. And so obviously a lot of big words pop out here: business, small, build, ecosystem. So we're all speaking a very similar language, but also thought it was interesting to see some of the other words that have popped up in terms of some of the different challenges. So whether it's having to deal with, just siloing, I think is really a huge challenge where oftentimes we're all very focused on our own particular things. And so really thinking about how we can be more holistic. So looking forward to diving into the conversation, and I'm already seeing a lot of folks responding in the chat, sharing where you're coming from, which is awesome. So if we can actually go to the next slide, we have another question for you all, which specifically is just to share something unique about your small business ecosystem. So whether it is, the kinds of businesses, whether it is just the environment, the vibe, how you feel when you're engaging with small businesses, share something unique about your small business ecosystem. You can just type that out into the chat. If you haven't introduced yourself yet, also would encourage you to use this time to, I guess, combine those two of where you're coming from and something unique about your specific small business ecosystem. Especially thinking about the fact that I think a couple of people have said now it's sunny and warm, seeing multilingual, different immigration statuses. Awesome, very cool. Encourage folks to continue to share, and also just, there's going to be a lot of presentation happening during the course of this workshop. So I encourage you, if you have questions, just to share them in the chat, and we'll get to them also throughout the course of the workshop as well. But again, give you all another moment to keep thinking through things that are unique about your small business ecosystem. Seeing a couple more responses popping in now. Folks are geographically isolated, limits our ability to bring in targeted resources. I think that's probably a challenge that a couple of folks probably have, especially thinking about the fact that this is especially focused for small cities. We got involved as a result of COVID, providing technical assistance, coordinating grants. The businesses we work with are very small. Great, very small, but also very mighty, I'm sure. So all that being said, I'm gonna turn it over to Elizabeth, who's gonna take us through the beginning of the presentation.
Great, thanks Armando, and thanks Destiny. I'm especially happy to be here today because I was part of the first webinar, and many of you requested a webinar dedicated to the needs of small cities. And so this is our way of saying thank you for your feedback. And we will be, hosting webinars throughout the years and keep building on the work that we started together and with many of you. So, keep looking out for that and keep providing feedback and letting us know what is most useful to you. So we'll start today. We already had some introductions. Keep introducing yourselves in the chat. And I'll quickly go over the objectives for today's session. mainly we're here to understand what it takes for smaller systems to build high functioning ecosystems. And there's less resources at the table. So what can we do? There's less data available. So how can we fill those gaps? That's going to be a big part of what we discuss this afternoon. We're going to recap a little bit about what we went over in the last webinar, and then we will have an opportunity to break out into groups to really go deep and have some conversations about what we're seeing on the ground. Today, the Next Street team will talk in depth about mapping your ecosystem assets and needs. They'll provide some case studies, some information, do some demos, and provide a mapping ecosystem assessment example. That will be before we break you guys out into groups so we can talk about capacity and asset mapping and go through an exercise. At the end, we'll leave a little bit of time for questions, but we do have a packed agenda today. Next slide. Oh, sorry, prior slide. Great. So just a reminder, when we wrote the Practitioner's Guide, we really did it with a couple of key goals in mind. One was to share best practices. One was to outline the potential roles in each market. And that exercise, there was a second webinar where we went through the exercise with some of you, and we got some great feedback on that, which is a great tool to use locally. We also provided some decision-making criteria to help you all understand where to focus your efforts and how to identify the best partners for the work, and then to offer guidance on how to create an implementation plan to execute. So if you have not gone to the Practitioner's Guide, please download it. There's a supplemental toolkit with some spreadsheets and worksheets that you can do alone, you can do with your partners. And so today we want to go deep and show how these tools can be used in smaller US cities, but really for this to be valuable, you need to take this outside of the webinar and really put it into practice and work with your partners. And so what our hope is to accomplish with you all is to just give you some inspiration, some ideas to take back, but the real work happens after the webinar is over. We only have an hour and a half. Next slide. I wanted to start by grounding us in some shared definitions. We shared this during the last webinar, but a small business, what is a small business? For the purposes of this conversation, it's an employer business with 1 to 49 employees, but also a non-employer business. So we're also talking about sole proprietors. Their needs are going to be different, but they're also incorporated into this work. Who is a practitioner? They're any organization with an interest, existing program, and or strategy to support diverse and unique small businesses. So if you have joined this webinar, you are a practitioner because you're interested in this work. We all come to this work from a different place. And so the importance of a strong ecosystem and the importance of creating a strong ecosystem is so that different partners that come with different tools, resources, thinking can come together and create a shared vision and really work together to use resources to their fullest. An ecosystem is a set of conditions and supports that all entrepreneurs need to thrive, to launch or expand or to sustain themselves. The word ecosystem isn't always very clear, but I think that that's the clearest definition that I've seen is conditions and supports. And then equity. What do we mean by equity? It's an approach that ensures that all businesses have the access to the same opportunities. It recognizes that advantages and barriers exist, and it seeks to right the unequal starting place for business owners. And so we lead with equity in this work, and we created this Practitioner's Guide with equity at the focus. Because we did see a real need for that in ecosystem building work. Next slide. So these are some community engagement principles and underlying strategies that really lead us at LISC as we do this work. We're a community development corporation. We have a comprehensive approach to community development. And over the years, we've seen that there needs to be certain principles or things in place for a local effort to be not only successful, but to meaningfully impact the people that live there, that work there, and that have businesses there. So first is the realizing equity. We talked about that a little earlier. Building on strengths. So working at the intersection of locational advantages, existing partnerships, growing industries and occupations. I just really want to stress that what works in one city is not going to work in another. So you really have to tailor your approach to, what makes you special, what you have, and what partners are already operating and doing great work in your market, as opposed to trying to start things from scratch. Developing community-based solutions, really recognizing who you're trying to support, and an emphasis that when you take a number of solutions and you combine them, you're going to have a better impact. Making a commitment to place. So LISC is a place-focused organization, but through ecosystem building, really focusing on specific communities to address concentrated opportunity in a really targeted and impactful way. And then we started talking about partnerships earlier, want to emphasize it again, creating new partnerships, but leveraging existing ones. And so this really is a team effort. You really need a deep bench to be successful in this work. I know that in a breakout session in another webinar that we had, people were talking about like the public library, like there's so many different players that that touch this space. And so a successful effort is going to require you to go out there and to find those partners and to really look in all places and to leverage the partners that you already have. Next slide. So with that, I will pass it to Katie, our partner at Next Street, who will take us through the next session of the presentation.
Hi, everyone. My name is Katie Johnson. As Elizabeth introduced me, and I work for Next Street. And Next Street is an organization, an anti-racist organization, really working to build more inclusive small business ecosystems. And you'll see a few different Next Streeters present over the next little bit, so I'll just have them give a wave so that you know who's talking to you as we go through next. We have Christian Lopez, who just waved there, Matt Revere, and then we'll also have Rian Irani, who will be one of our small group leaders as well. And I see a few other Next Streeters, I think, sprinkled around the call. Good to see some friendly faces. So as we kind of talk to you about some of these different approaches, we'll kind of give you a mix of the what we're hoping it'll produce and the how you can kind of go about figuring out that data, or kind of how to bring this to life. And then we'll also take you through some different exercises to actually practice doing some of the work yourself. So we'll intersperse all of those different approaches here. And we wanted to start with a little bit of the what of some of the data that you might want to gather through some of these different exercises. And here we're looking at a little bit of a snapshot of data, quantitative data in this case, from the Buffalo Niagara Falls region or metro area within New York. And so, a few different things about this. And we'll also, I should say, we'll revisit this Buffalo ecosystem later in the presentation too, to just see kind of what kind of services are available here. But a few things that I'm noticing from this data, which we've pulled largely from different census data sources. You'll see that in terms of total small businesses, that the number of small business employer businesses, or those that have employees, is actually fairly flat to declining, or has been over time, versus some of the sole proprietors, or sole props, as we might say, are increasing a little bit. And, as I'm kind of going to go in with a curious brain about figuring out why some of that might be, as I look at this data, and then also as I have conversations, interviews with folks, etc., just kind of understand that. But that's kind of giving me a little bit of a hypothesis of something I might want to dig into a little bit more. 20% of small businesses have paid employees. So as we also see here on the left-hand side, from the total small business count, most of the small businesses are those sole prop businesses. And then, one other clue into what might be happening with some of this business population is actually in the age of business owners. They're at the bottom right. One of the things I'm kind of curious to dig into more is that there seem to be a lot of small business owners. We see this in a lot of different metro areas where baby boomers actually represent the majority of the employer, the small businesses that have employees, those employer firms. And so I'm really curious about what's going to happen as folks look to retire or sell their businesses or hand those on to future generations. That's kind of one of the things that this is jogging for me. And also just wondering about how do we help, grow some of those non-employer businesses to have jobs and sort of promote that within the community. So those are some of the different hypotheses that are coming to mind in my head as I'm looking at this. One other thing to point out, which is really something that you might find if you're in a smaller metro area, like many of you on the phone are here today, the ownership of businesses on that lower right. You'll see in a few places that the data is not available. And that sometimes happens when, as we would say, low end count. So it might happen when there aren't enough businesses to be able to report on, either for privacy of those businesses, because you could really easily identify who they are, or just because that the data has such few responses that you can't necessarily extrapolate meaningful data. So you might come across that. And if you do, then we'll just have to look to other research tools to help us kind of fill in some of the gaps in information there. And so that's a little bit of a case study of sort of what is some of the data that you might find through exercises like this. This is quantitative, and we'll talk you through both some quantitative and qualitative data that we'll gather here. But I next just want to kind of zoom back out and talk about how you might go about kind of collecting some of this data and what you might do with it. So I'll kind of zoom us back out to that, and thank you, perfect timing here. So now, we'll think about how are we sort of using that data such that we can actually help set strategies for our organizations and for our ecosystems overall. And we think about that as sort of a multi-step process. So first, we're going to understand the local small business ecosystem. You can see on that kind of far left chevron. We're going to use that information to help us decide where to focus, prioritize, and figure out where we want to put our efforts, either our efforts as an organization or as an ecosystem. And then on the right-hand side, we'll figure out how to operationalize the plan and manage it for success, right? I know there's always a lot of planning that we put up front, and then the devil's in the details of how it actually gets implemented, right? So how do you have that implementation in place? And then throughout, sort of how does community engagement, community input and the like really inform all of these different processes along the way through small business involvement, government, funder, other practitioners and the like. And so we'll spend a lot of today really talking about that understanding the ecosystem piece, and then how to kind of use that to inform some strategies. And so let's start with that understand the local ecosystem piece and dig in a little bit deeper. So we're taking that first chevron of understanding the local ecosystem, and we want to draw on available information. Has there been an ecosystem assessment from a group like Next Street in your community before? Have there been other ecosystem assessments from the local government or other nonprofit organizations? So kind of looking at what other data might be out there. Also interviewing, talking to folks, other peer and local organizations, government partners, funders, what are they seeing within the local small business ecosystem? And researching different government, local organization websites, partnerships, social media. What are the different services that are out there? What are the different needs that we're seeing kind of arise in those different formats? And then we'll use that information to prioritize small business needs and develop solutions. So as we look across all this data that we've gathered, what are some of the themes that bubble up around challenges business owners are facing or opportunities we have in serving those businesses, especially businesses owned by people of color, as we're looking to build wealth in those communities? And then we'll work with other local ecosystem leaders to refine a priority list. So as I mentioned, these can help inform your own organization strategies as well as your ecosystem strategies. So who are the right people to be there to help kind of figure out what's on that priority list so that y'all can make the sort of collective impact that you're seeking to make. So as we sort of go into the how, I want to dig into some more of the questions that we can be asking to help us figure out what data we're looking for through those different channels. So we kind of want to understand basically the state of small businesses. We want to understand the services available to them, and we want to understand the capital. Sometimes if we want to get really jargony, we call this the supply and demand landscape, right? What are businesses demanding? What do they need? And then what kind of services and products are out there available for them so that we can understand kind of how best to meet their needs and what areas might be missing. And so the state of the small business, we want to understand how many small businesses exist in the market. What are the relevant industries for those small businesses? What are demographics of businesses in your local market? You saw some of that information on that case study of Buffalo that I shared, sort of what's going on within the market. And we want to know, there's lots more information we could get to as we look at industries in your local market, for example. That could help inform sort of industry specific strategies. And we also want to look at services. So who's out there providing technical assistance or business advising? What are the current needs of small businesses for services? And then similarly for capital, what's out there and what are some of the needs? I'm seeing a lot of questions come in the chat or lots of different things. So let me just pause and make sure I'm seeing anything there. Great. And so with that, I do want to ask a question for folks in the chat. I'm curious about how much folks have done data collection like this in the past. So maybe write in the chat if this is something that you're sort of used to doing and you've done, you kind of want to build up your muscle even further, or if this is kind of brand new for you. We'd be curious just to hear from you about where you are in this journey. Great, and I see Julie's kind of in development of a mobile app to support small businesses. So data like this could really help kind of user data in developing tools like that. So glad that you're on the line. Curious about what data you might be gathering for that. Nonprofit ecosystem. Yeah, there's lots of different ecosystems as we use that word that Elizabeth helped us define, lots of different ways we could look at this. Intake with 200 small businesses. Yeah, even using your own data. What a great data source of intake data for small businesses and who's coming through your doors and how that might be different than maybe the general landscape of small businesses in your markets. Collected data around neighborhood and variety and needs within a variety of topics. Yeah. Serve as a guide for rural small businesses. Great. So almost like lots of different products and services in development, and how could resources like this help to kind of figure out some of those strategies? Great, we'll keep the comments coming. I'm going to go ahead and transition us over to Christian, who's going to talk a little bit more about qualitative and quantitative data sources and get you into an exercise to practice yourself. Thanks,
Katie. So let's start first with just qualitative data sources. Here we have a list of resources to assist in your research. So as practitioners, we should build on the existing work, as Katie mentioned, that has already been done in the communities by conducting a literature review of past work. This can include LISC and Next Street's extensive library of reports, ranging from ecosystem assessments to playbooks. Next, a good source of data is interviews with local organizations, government partners, and funders. Those interviews can drive insights to the status of the current ecosystem. The goal of those interviews can vary. On one hand, you can focus on understanding your organization's strengths and areas of improvement as you set your small business strategy. And on the other hand, you can learn about what your peer organizations are working on and how you can get involved. Finally, spending time understanding the websites, partnerships, and social media for state and local organizations that interact with small businesses can give you a sense of the current pulse of small businesses in your local neighborhood. And so pushes us to the next slide. In terms of quantitative data sources, the US Census has a set of economic reports that are important for small business indicators, namely the annual business survey, the county business patterns, and the quarterly workforce indicators. This data is available at the state, county, and metropolitan level. Those data sets, however, have their limitations, which is why economists collaborated to create the Opportunity Insights Economic Tracker, an interactive website that measures economic activity at a granular level in real time. PolicyMap is a geographic information tool in which you can overlay economic indicators. SourceLink helps develop entrepreneurial ecosystems and has a variety of solutions and reports available on their website. Venture Forward is a research initiative from GoDaddy, a web domain company, and has readily available data on online microbusinesses. For now, we will make sure that these links and resources are easily available to you. They are also included in LISC and Next Street's Practitioner's Guide. The data source that you use will depend on what you're interested in learning about. If, for example, I'm interested in understanding the location of businesses that received an SBA loan in my community, then PolicyMap would be a good resource. Next, we want to walk you through a quick demo for how to pull that data from PolicyMap that can help inform our work. Go to the next slide. And so PolicyMap, just a quick overview of what is PolicyMap. It's a tool that makes geographic data easily accessible and understandable to policymakers and practitioners. The tool provides data related to health, housing, jobs, incomes, government incentives, employment, demographics, local institutions, and more. Today, we will be using the tool to review jobs data from small businesses, as well as SBA loan data, including the 7A and PPP loan program. The tool has a free version for the public and a subscriber version with additional features that allows for multi-layer applications, among other features. We'll look at the free version today and provide an opportunity for you to practice with a couple of challenge questions after the demo. So at this point, I'll go ahead and share my screen and walk you through a demonstration for how to use the PolicyMap tool. And so here is the landing page. You can quickly access the free version of the tool by clicking on Open Map at the top or in the middle side of the screen here. But before we get started, I just want to provide an overview of the user interface here for this tool. So up at the top, we have a search tool, a search bar, if you will, where you can search for the specific data point or data layer that you're looking for applying onto the map. And then you can also look for a specific geography that you're interested in focusing the map in. Right under it, you have the data layers and data points categorized into the different categories I mentioned earlier. So demographics, incomes and spending. Today we'll focus on lending and economy for the most part. So let's go ahead and just use this in practice. We'll go through a live walkthrough and I'll demonstrate my own hometown, Lynn, Massachusetts. And so if I just pull that up, it'll zoom into my hometown. And of course, it'll give the city limits for Lynn, Mass. And let's first start by applying a data layer of small business jobs. And so if I go into economy, small business and startups, there are a few different options. You can look at where the new business startups are, where the jobs at small businesses are by different tiers of businesses. And these are the same tiers from the Small Business Administration, the SBA. And then you can look at jobs at startup businesses. So we'll focus on the jobs at small businesses with less than 20 employees and use this as a proxy for identifying neighborhoods in Lynn, Massachusetts that have a high concentration of small businesses. This will be helpful if you want to have targeted programs or identify where there is a cluster of small businesses that you could potentially target for your programs. And so I'll go ahead and apply that layer. And what you see here is a spectrum of colors and of the shade of purple. And so I'll walk through this data layer pretty quickly here. And so again, the data layer that we're looking at is percent of jobs at firms with fewer than 20 employees. The data is from the year 2017, the varies by percent. And so the lighter the shading, that means in relation to all the businesses. And also this is shaded by block group. So we can change it to census tract, zip codes. Lynn has a few zip codes, but we want to keep it probably just at a level that we can distinguish between different neighborhoods. So census tract does a good job at doing just that. And so again, the darker the shading here, it means the higher concentration of small businesses with less than 20 employees in that census tract. And so I'm familiar with Lynn, Mass. It is my hometown. And so I want to just confirm that what I'm looking at is correct. And I know that down here next to the Linway, there's a Walmart, and there's also a lot of auto dealers. And so naturally, well, it would make sense that the percentage is a lighter color of purple here. So there aren't many small business there, and a concentration of small businesses there. On the flip side, I know that in West Lynn, it's more of a residential neighborhood. And so the businesses that would exist here or that would be hiring employees would be, gasoline stations, coffee shops, convenience stores, corner stores, et cetera. And so again, this would be a good proxy for identifying pockets within Lynn, Mass, where there are concentrations of small businesses. And so that's one data point, one piece of information that we can use. And if we want to go ahead and apply this and look at the data, with additional information, PolicyMap also allows us to point the location of businesses that have received SBA loans. And so what I'll do is go ahead and actually just plot the locations of businesses that receive 7A loans. And as we know, the 7A loan program, these are loans that are appealing to small businesses who may not be eligible to pursue loans from a traditional route, such as a financial institution, because they may be deemed too risky, or the borrower lacks collateral. So again, PolicyMap has data on the locations of these businesses that have received the 7A loan, and we can overlay the information about where these small businesses might be, where we would expect small businesses to be concentrated, to determine whether or not capital is flowing from the federal government, from traditional institutions to where the small businesses are located. So here we can see in the areas where we have a darker shade of purple that we have a cluster of those 7A recipients. And so we can actually go ahead and even click on some of these to see some more additional information. And this is public information that is available through the SBA. It's just funneled into PolicyMap to make it more user-friendly. And so we can see information about how many jobs were created by the loan and who even was the originating lender for the program. Another interesting piece here is the PPP program.
Christian, just before you move forward, I'm seeing a couple. Yeah. I'm seeing Mary Jo with her hand raised, and a couple questions come in the chat. So just wanted to maybe pause for a second. Mary Jo, I think you also put your. Feel free to come off mute and share your question.
Christian, can you hear me? Okay, this is Mary Jo.
Yes.
Yes. I actually know Lynn as well, so this is kind of fun that you're using your hometown. Question: the lightest purple, is that fair to assume that it's all corporate or large employers, or could light purple also be areas where there is no employment, meaning some open space area or something like that?
Yeah, that's a good point. And so as we are interpreting the data, that is a good point. Another point that should be brought up too is this is just for employer firms. And as we saw in Katie's example, the majority of businesses in the United States are non-employer firms. And so we aren't capturing all of the small businesses. And so we have to, when presenting the data, make sure that we're clear that we're speaking about employer firms and where the data is actually available to your point. Any other questions? All right. So just to round us out here, I just wanted to show also the PPP loans. And again, another caveat here is with PPP loans, the data that was publicly released is only for PPP loans greater than $150,000. Of course, that would exclude a lot of businesses that are much smaller and didn't meet that threshold. So we do have to work here with some data limitations here, but this would also confirm here that a lot of the PPP loans went to, well, again, the threshold is $150,000, went to areas where we have a lot of that lighter shading of purple, and not so much here in the darker shades, because that information just isn't available to us. That wasn't disclosed by the federal government. And so again, you can click on one of these and see additional information about the about that loan, including jobs and originating lender. So I mean, we don't have much time to spend here on this tool. It's a tool you could spend many hours on and exploring the data.
Sorry, there are a couple other questions that came through. I think that would be worth. It seems like there were a couple questions on just like how you got to the part. I think around the loans in particular, probably because I interrupted your flow with questions. Would you mind just showing that part again?
Yes. Yes. 1 second. So there are a couple ways to do that. One, you can use a search tool, the search bar at the top. Another option is to just, it's in the lending option. But if I wanted to just look for PPP loans, you can just search it up at the top as well if you wanted to pull that up. So PPP loans would bring that up. And so as another point here, I just wanted to bring up too is this is what is available with just the free option with PolicyMap. With the subscriber option, you can apply different data filters. You could tier these loans by the different tranches. I know that you can look at less than $1 million. So there are definitely a lot more customization options available. Let's see what other questions we have here. Taking a look at this. Get to this part. Oh, to how to access the map in general. Right from the home screen, you can click the open map at the top right, or just open map here on the landing page. Can you get how many of the SBA loans or PPP loans went to business owners of color? So yes, so that would be with the subscriber option. You should be able to filter that. A caveat there too is a very small percentage of PPP loans. Well, at the beginning of the program, when it was being rolled out in Q2 of 2020, that information wasn't being captured, and so use that information, with a grain of salt. It's not a data point that was actively captured at the beginning of the program. Any other questions that I may have missed? I think that may have been it. Okay. And so to tie this all together, I mean, so again, why did we show this information? I'll just stop sharing my screen here. You can use data to tell a story for what your program is hoping to achieve. And so if I'm able to identify neighborhoods that have a high percentage of small businesses, and then overlay that with where some of the capital programs from the government, from the federal government, can tell us a story as to where capital is flowing to small businesses. In my own experience at Next Street, I've used PolicyMap to build a case for additional funding in specific neighborhoods by drawing that connection. I've also used PolicyMap to identify low to moderate income locations when conducting research in geographies that I'm not too familiar with. And so, again, just one tool that is available at your disposal. In our last webinar, we used another tool called the Small Business Equity Toolkit, which is a similar type of mapping interface that, but I guess one of the limitations there is that it only provided data for the top 100 metropolitan areas. And so I'll ask Katie just to bring back up the slides, and we'll open up the challenge. We encourage everyone to use the chat to answer these questions and take a try using PolicyMap and to look at Loretto, Texas, and see if you can infer what areas in Loretto, Texas have a relatively large concentration of small businesses. And then the second question would be, what was the PPP amount approved to Hilltop Pools and Spas in Winston-Salem, North Carolina, and what was the originating lender? So we'll just give a few minutes here, and I'll pull up the answer in just a second. Alrighty. And so I'll go ahead and just share my screen for the first one and just do a quick demo on that one. So for Loretto, Texas, what we were hoping for participants to be able to pull up is similar to what I did for Lynn, Mass, is to look at jobs, jobs at small businesses with less than 20 employees. So if I just put jobs 20, we'll pull up a similar shading. And if we zoom in a little bit, we can see that there are 3 different pockets of well, census tracts with a concentration of over 50%, where there are jobs at firms with fewer than 20 employees. And so it can be a safe assumption, we can infer here that these are neighborhoods or neighborhood corridors where there would be a high concentration of small businesses. And so I won't, I'll let Katie bring it back up the slides, but I won't do the same for the Winston-Salem, North Carolina example. We'll just give you the answer to that one in the interest of time. And so just to wrap us up here and hand it off to Matt. Again, data helps us contextualize. It helps us build a case for a specific strategy. And especially if we want to build a place-based strategy, identifying key neighborhoods to focus on, and the supporting data will help us do that. And I'll turn it over to Matt to talk about ecosystem roles.
Thanks, Christian, for the overview of that very, very powerful tool. PolicyMap is one of the wonderful tools that we can use for our organizations. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Matt Rivera. I'm actually very, very excited to be part of this webinar, as I am from a small ecosystem myself. I built my career in an ecosystem of Buffalo, New York. So I understand a lot of the challenges that a lot of your organizations have within these ecosystems. And we just want to talk a little bit about the ecosystems that you are and some of the things and how to map those out. So what are the first things you want to take a look at as the ecosystem roles? Where does our organization take place? To the left are the direct operators. These would be organizations that provide technical assistance, feet on the ground to small business owners, and as well as capital providers. All the way on the other side, we have the advocates and investigators. These would be organizations that are more our discussion and collaboration to really elevate the community. And what we're really looking to do in this mapping exercise is, one, to make sure we know where our organization fits. You may do a few different things within these buckets, but which one actually we do the best of? Two, is there any gaps within our ecosystem? Is there any gaps within our ecosystem that we can fill? And three, what are the opportunities for partnership within our organizations, within our ecosystems, to really move our ecosystem forward? Because we know that our ecosystems, that the resources may be limited, and what are those opportunities can be. So if we move to the next slide, what we did here was, yes, there are definitions of the various roles, which we'll get into. So what we did here was we assessed the Buffalo ecosystem as an example. So the service providers, those would be things such as your traditional technical assistance providers, such as your SBDC centers and anything that's providing that direct technical assistance. From there, we move to our capital providers. These are both traditional and non-traditional CDFI lending, as well as community-based banks. And then you have your innovator, capacity builder, and funders. This Buffalo has seen a large establishment of both public and private money being funded within the past 10 years, which markets like Detroit may have been seen as well. And because of that, a lot of that funding has been going into these buckets where you have the 43N, which is a great pitch competition. You have Launch New York, which is focusing on building up minority and women-owned businesses within the tech sector. And so focusing on that. However, what does and what we do see happen because of this is the convener bucket is a little bit light, where there's not a lot of organizations. And within the Buffalo ecosystem, there's really no organizations focused on that connectivity. And because of that, there may be these conversations that are happening informally, but without that formal communication moving forwards, what we're looking at and what we're seeing is reduced referrals and kind of almost a weakening system, and some things may be duplicative. And so when we see, we can move to the next slide. And so when we see this, and one of the strengths that we actually have in a small ecosystem and developing it is partnerships. Strengthening those relationships and moving them from an informal way to a more formal partnership will help build this ecosystem and create a lot more opportunities for the organization, the ecosystem as well. So we all know the partnership games, and what we're really focusing on here is the 3 levels of the partnerships. We have the discovery, emerging, and development. And so some characteristics of something that would be a developing partnership is that there may be limited knowledge of what the partner offers. There may be no relationship or informal referrals back to each other. And there's not that trust between the organizations. And so these are ones that maybe they're new to the ecosystem, or maybe we just don't know what work they're doing. And what we can do when there's that partnership that's in the discovery phase is really understand what the partner offers, having those conversations, and what conversations we can be having to really be pushing this partnership forward. And then what you do want to do is create a referral relationship with a very highly vetted client, a client that you know may be hitting these buckets that they serve often, just to get that. The next one is emerging, which I think a lot of partnerships fall into. And this is where you have a concrete understanding of what the partner and products and what they serve. There is a referral relationship there that you can bounce clients back and forth, or you understand the relationship and how they benefit you if they're a funder or things of that nature. And the connections have been made at the senior leadership within your companies. So there is that dialogue happening at the higher executive level directions. Now, this is where we kind of see a lot of partnerships kind of stick. And what are some ways we can actually get that to deepen those partnerships to build a very strong ecosystem where people are speaking and communicating and to have those shared resources? So one of them is to ensure that the referrals are tracked in a very formal way, so you can have those success stories, so you can understand more in depth of what each organization does and how to benefit each other. And then finally, in this bucket, we all know that in this environment, joint funding opportunities is the way to go. Almost all grant applications are in a collaborative space. And so when you get those grant opportunities that are in collaboration, this is a great place for us to really think about and to deepen those and to get these partnerships in a great place. Then finally, we have our partners that are very developed. These are clients, these are partners that are very strong knowledge of product and services. Everything is formal and tracked in a way. And there's those deep, deep connections between the two organizations, or if not more. One of the things you want to do there is to make sure it stays at this level. And one of the things you want to make sure is that you highlight those shared success stories, as well as really deepen the relationship by by applying some larger funding opportunities. We know some of the larger ones as well, of JP Morgan, Advancing Cities, and whatever other ones may be coming down the pipeline. Having already that deepened development partnership will lead to great opportunities, both for ecosystem and your organization as well. Great. So we can just move to the next one. So now we're looking at the capabilities needed for each role. Again, so the direct operators, the service providers, the capital providers, these are clients that what we're looking at are really focused on the hands-on technical assistance. So things that their capabilities would be more focused on are at the top of the funnel on the left, on the execution portion. They're executing the work. They're meeting with the small business owners. So they're doing the delivery, they're doing the product program and design, as well as the compliance control, and very engaging in the community as well. Then as we move to the right of the screen, to the advocate and investigator roles, they're more in the planning bucket. And so more on the right hand, on the bottom of the funnel on the left, where they're focused more on the bigger picture of the strategy session, of gathering the research, of that partner management. And so one of the really great things that this tool can do is help you map this out in your ecosystem and understand what partnerships have to be conveying so that the information is flowing from each bucket. So the service provider can give the very detailed on the ground information that they're getting to the investigator that can give the more higher funding, a higher idea. And then in the middle, you have the funder with all this data. You can really drive the most funding possible to the most efficient buckets possible to ensure that the initiatives in the ecosystem are being funded correctly and having the correct funded outcome. Great. And so from here, we have been speaking a lot, so we want to hear from you. We're going to have 6 breakout rooms where we're going to spend the next 25 minutes really focusing on these guiding questions. What organizations are playing major roles within your ecosystem today? Are the capabilities or roles that your organization provides are unique to your ecosystem? Who are the organizational partners in your city? And how do you complement each other? And then finally, going back to PolicyMap, how could PolicyMap data inform the services you provide and other conversations you have with partners? So we'll be sending you to breakout rooms right now for the next 25 minutes. And then we'll have a quick debrief when we come back. Hey, everybody. Thanks for all coming back. I love those conversations. I wish it could all be these conversations. One of the things that happened in my breakout group is we actually were able to make a connection with a CDFI with another partner organization. So just naturally, those partnerships kind of came out. So it's really great to see. And I'd love to open it up right now. If anyone would love to share into the larger group, some of the things that y'all talked about and outcomes.
So I'll go first. This is OC Irons, and in our room, we didn't really have any conversation about outcomes, but we did share the organizations that were operating as what I loosely call partners in a couple of markets. And again, I'm just speaking for myself, I think. So that if any of the folks in that room want to add on or refute anything I'm saying, please do so. By the number of partners, the number of organizations represented in each of these markets, it was somewhat apparent that the role of the convener and strategist, I will call it that. So those are two elements I think that are very important based on the number of partners and organizations that were represented. And we did have a comment that was made about the level or the degree to which some of the organizations were participative in the mix of lifting up and developing small businesses and entrepreneurship. So that was that's my biggest takeaway. And again, if any of the others in that room would add, here's your chance.
You nailed it.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you so much for that insight. And, it is these conversations where we can kind of see where those gaps are, right? Like it's not just our ecosystem, but these are kind of these weak points that we see in a lot of different cities that, these are actually things that we can make at these levels. So thank you. Thank you for that feedback. And thank you for that comment. Is anyone else would like to go and share? Got you, Mary Jo.
I had something I shared in our breakout group, but I actually have a colleague who is Monique. So we're in the same ecosystem. And I don't know if she can relate to what I'm about to say, but we're fortunate in that we have a nice diverse range of, I'll call it players or stakeholders in our small business ecosystem in our city. But the referral structure is not formalized. It's informal. And it works okay. But it started to make me, just listening to you all Next Street presenters and things, that we probably could improve on how getting very particular about how businesses are referred through our network and to whom, and then also circling back with a particular small business a little while later to see how they did. Did they get that loan? Did they negotiate that lease? They're 1 year into their venture. How they doing? That kind of thing we're not as good at. We're so focused on just getting someone open, and then we kind of move on to the next thing. So I think there's a lot for us to learn, but we're fortunate that we at least have an ecosystem of players. But that was my observation.
No, Mary Jo, I think you're absolutely correct. How many times have people have this call if they help the small business get open, then all of a sudden not know about this great success 2 years later until they're on the news or until they're on, I had a client on Oprah once. I'm like, what? And so, these stories, and it's like, how do we capture that data more? How do we get an informal process more formalized? And it doesn't have to be complex. Like there's a lot of tools and resources out there to get that done. So that's a great takeaway. And I think it really goes into building and highlighting that ecosystem, the work you're doing. So thank you for that. I think we have time for one more if someone else would like to share. One last thing. Come on, someone be brave. Finish
I'd like
this
to
out.
share something maybe on behalf of my group.
Sure.
I wanted to lift up, just because I think this might be something that others might see too. If you're in a smaller city, just not even having that many different organizations to put on that roles worksheet of who do you even put there, and so just wanted to lift that up, because I think that's probably something that many of us have seen in different places. One of the things I think we talked about in our group is thinking through the types of organizations that are on the list might be sort of different depending on your ecosystem. It may be government organizations, it may be nonprofits, or it could even be for-profit accountants in your community, or other kind of service providers like that. And so just kind of wanted to lift up that as a potential challenge that we're happy to kind of continue the conversation and help folks work through as well.
Awesome. Thank you for that. And thanks everyone for this. So we'll just go back quickly. I want to share some additional resources for you as well when you're thinking about some other things and additional resources and reports for you. All of these reports are vetted, and they're very, very, very powerful tools. Just some of my favorite ones here are this JP Morgan Global Philanthropy, to really understand what building and funding at the local level looks like. JP Morgan now is taking obviously a more active place in the local markets that we know of. So that's a great one. Another one is the Main Street America's Entrepreneurial System and the role of commercial districts. This really talks about how to build those kind of main streets, what you can do to spark that momentum. And we all know the main streets is how we define our communities and some things around that. Then finally, very hot off the press is a National Inclusive Metro Recovery Playbook. We still know, especially in a lot of retail and a lot of food and beverage, COVID, we're just going to be coming out of this. And this has some great tips and great tools for us to really help the entrepreneurs to how to take off, and maybe some opportunities that exist from that pivot. So those are just three, but all these are wonderful tools that I suggest if you have the time, take a look at for sure. Great. And then we just, we have about 8 minutes left. So we just wanted to open it up. If you have any questions about anything covered today in general, we'd love to chat about anything for the last few minutes.
We love the awkward silence here at Next Street. So we'll sit here and let it grow until somebody's ready to speak.
That's right.
All right, so I'll do that thing in the spirit of post-COVID, non-silence, whatever. So you shared a lot of resources today, and the question that I have is related to ongoing kind of support of specific community work. So if I'm sitting here in Toledo, just as an example, and I was looking through some of the resources that were provided or discussed today, and wanted more assistance, say from the perspective of ongoing projects or programming, developing strategy that utilize some of these tools and strategies. What would you suggest I do in terms of gathering that from among this body?
Yeah, absolutely. I can take that one. Appreciate the question. I mean, so I think there's a couple different things that come to mind. First of all, I'll put in, and we'll have it on a slide here at the end, but I'll put in email addresses for LISC and for Next Street, so that if you want to reach out to us to just get like personal one-on-one types of questions, happy to take those. Also, I would offer up NavNet as a resource. I know a lot of folks on this group actually found out about the webinar through NavNet, and I think one of our goals is that, and Katie, can you put that link in the chat maybe? That's a place where different business support and business service organizations can come together and kind of learn from each other and support each other in all of that. And they offer different sort of best practice sharing and things like that through that network. And I would also ask the LISC team, I know that you have a number of different resources and things like that coming up. So if there's anything else that you want to make sure to share in terms of your sort of entrepreneur support organizations, how that's coming to life. I know that you also do a lot through NavNet and those other channels, so that's great too, if those are the main ones. And then I'd also ask you, like, what more do you want from this type of group? So, you know, it'll be in the survey, the post survey, which I know everybody will fill out. But just in case you don't, you could also just drop some things into the chat. You know, how would you like to come together with groups like this and support each other through it? So throw some of those into the chat as well. I saw Ebony, I think, coming off mute too, so I wanted to give you space.
Yeah, thank you. So, you know, I shared in my group that I come to this from the perspective of CDFIs and nonprofits that are serving entrepreneurs, small businesses of color. And so when I'm thinking about the ecosystem, I'm also thinking about it in relation to them. And so I'm curious, this is something that I know I find myself dealing with since I'm usually brought into a city because through a funder. What are some of the strategies for helping people to recognize power dynamics and how to promote power sharing in the aspect of partnerships, authentic partnerships, and really trying to collaborate on work to do some real ecosystem shifts?
I love that. And I'll take that as a whole topic that we could, in terms of things that we could, I feel like I will struggle to answer that in a 2-minute soundbite, but I think that would be a great thing to come back to as a group and share strategies for. So I love that. Appreciate that.
Yeah.
What else in terms of final questions or topics that you want to come back together, how you'd want to use a group like this? Oh, yes. We've got lots of +1s for Ebony's in the comments. That sounds great. Great. We can also just pull up some next steps on our end. And I know we've had a couple of, requests for slides and information like that. We'll be sure to email around the content so that folks have access to the report and the presentation and all of that. But just in terms of other things that you can do, and this sort of gets at OC's questions too about sort of what can you do next? And so, as you start to develop that sort of roles map of where those different organizations fit, test that. That's kind of a hypothesis that you've built, right? Like that's kind of your first pass at what that could look like. We encourage you to test that with other local organizations. Look at other groups' websites. Are they doing kind of what you think they're doing? Talk to them, kind of learn more about that. And then also we kind of briefly touched upon organizational capabilities. Those are explained a lot more in depth in the report. But just think about your organization's capabilities. Talk to your staff, talk to your partners. Do you all agree about sort of where your organization's capabilities are? And if you're serving in specific roles, say you're acting as a capacity builder, for example, are there other capabilities that you should work on building out to best kind of live into that specific role or roles? And then figure out sort of what you need to do. What are some of your options for moving forward based on where your capabilities are or where you could grow or where the needs are within your ecosystem. And again, you can think about this both for your organization as well as kind of the broader ecosystem. So coming back together with, I loved that there were a couple folks from the same ecosystem here, coming back together with a group of folks from your ecosystem, I think would be a great next step for kind of deepening the work. And please do connect with us. Here's information here on how to reach our teams, and we love hearing from you. Also happy to give, personal email addresses if that's at all helpful. So from here, I think we will let folks go about their day. We will put up a survey at the end. So we do look forward to your feedback and hearing more about what would be most helpful in support of you. But thank you so much for your time and attention and engagement today. And we've just learned a ton from you, and we hope you've gotten something as well from this.